Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached, and I'm here to review The Batman. If you end up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord, second to my Patreon, third to my PayPal. Any donations are greatly appreciated, help support the channel, and help support me. And shilling will be retold at the end of the review. With that being said, let's get into The Batman. This will be a spoiler review, so I'm getting that out of the way now. And, coincidentally, as right before this movie came out, I actually started getting into the animated show, The Batman. So, quite an interesting little take on that version of The Batman, I suppose, if there's going to be a one-to-one. Or, adaptation, if we're gonna look into that. I'll go into that at the end, closer to the end of the review, and how I think that all panned out. But for now, we're gonna go through the plot, the main story, scene by scene, or, as much as I have written down, and look at it as objectively as possible. That means pointing out when the good stuff is good, and just as importantly, pointing out when the bad stuff is bad. With that out of the way, the movie begins with someone looking into this large building, and eventually that man, or whomever is in there, gets attacked. We also see a young kid in there as well. After this attack happens, we cut to the news and a debate about how crime has increased in the we are told that the vigilante of the Batman is already present and has been for at least 2 years. Though, even with those 2 years, crime seems to only be increasing still. As the attack continues, or as the movie kind of continues on, the narration of the Batman kicks in as he talks about how fear is a tool, and more so how he is the darkness. This is integrated into his introduction, as these 3 groups of criminals are all varying to do different things in very different locations. We have a typical thief in a store, we have another person doing something or other, and we have this gang who's riding on the train, following this man and getting ready to beat him down. Among them, the 2 previous ones I mentioned notice the shadows and notice the bat signal in particular, and get so scared that they just run off and completely cut out from proceeding to go any further in their crimes, while the group of the gang have no clue who the Batman is yet. And they come across the Batman, making his presence known to this particular group. So he deals his sense of justice to them. They are beaten down in a pretty good action sequence. We cut to him passing by the police afterwards, being sort of ushered or kind of allowing to be passed through, and he gets to move along with Gordon in particular. Obviously, this thing is between him and Gordon is a little bit more established in the series because they have more time to do that, obviously. But this is an indication that these 2 have already been working together to an extent, and that their trust has already reached that point of they use the police, and him in particular uses the bat signal to, do that. So he sees the riddle. So we are dealing with our primary villain, the Riddler. I will say it now, I think the Riddler, for the most part, works here in this movie. I think most of his earlier, his riddles, up until he loses it, is pretty sufficient as a Riddler. He definitely has an intimidation factor, which is something you kind of expect a little bit of more of a, whenever people probably think of the Riddler, they probably think of the Jim Carrey, like, woohoo, funky, charismatic, over the top, that type of level of the Riddler. This one, that little freak out only happens near the end of the movie, and admittedly, I personally found it a bit cringe, his level of, like, ooh, freaking out. But he does figure out the riddle. He sees the little boy that was left behind there, as he sort of goes off with more of his narration. And they break it down again. If they break it down here, that this is again his second year of doing this work, as his butler Alfred heads down. And this is quite an interesting aspect, is that he doesn't care about the family business in terms of Wayne Enterprises, or so much to say that this is actually in line with the show The Batman, is that at least initially, he didn't really do much with, being a Wayne, up until a few episodes in. And in that show, it was definitely Alfred who kept pushing him, is like, hey, if you want people to not know that you're Batman, you gotta keep up the Bruce Wayne appearance. So that is very much in line with that version of the show. Here, it is very much the same. So again, in terms of if you're wanting to make that comparison to the show and the Batman. Anyway, he says that protecting the city is now his legacy, or their legacy more so. So Alfred does what he does and begins to help with this cipher clue that they are given. They eventually get to the point where they are able to get to the clue, which is the word drive. So he suits up and he heads over to go towards the Penguin, who is sort of like this side sort of like villain, I guess, or secondary villain, as well as Falcone, which is also a name I've heard very much so in Batman lore. So Batman goes to work. He fights in the club, or through the club. It's a little bit, that part's a little bit ridiculous of how he gets in through that front part, but whatever. So he does meet up with the Penguin to look at the clue, which are these sets of pictures and this woman in it. And he begins to watch her as she sort of makes her entrance, still wearing very much similar to what she was wearing, so that's very odd. As she goes off on her own after the fact, after he's sort of watching her now, she puts on the basic, or a basic version of what I'm going to call the Catwoman suit. I will say, in terms of her relevance, Catwoman, her role is very prominent, at least in the earlier parts. Her romance, much like in the show, is pretty much led by her in a way. She does steal things to a degree. In fact, she was working on stealing something in this moment as she was going out as Catwoman. I do feel like, in terms of if you're going to make the adaptation argument, I feel like out of all of the characters in here, I feel like the Batman is the closest we have seen to Batman that I think most people kind of expect to see in this era. In terms of the other characters, however, I will say the adaptation argument doesn't work as well for them. The Riddler has a very distinct, different look here. Catwoman is I feel like she's very toned down. In the show, she does have a very seductive nature to her, again, in the show. And I feel like they did not want to have a female be seductive. I know that sounds really weird to say, but we do live in an era, unfortunately, where I guess it's sexist for a woman to be seductive or something. I don't know. It's super weird. So she's definitely more grounded as a character. And I think they offset that by having her be willing to kill somebody, whereas the Batman distinctly does not. So they make it very distinctly clear in this version of Batman, he does not kill yet. As far as I can see, he did not kill anyone in this movie, unless I missed something. Explicitly, he doesn't, but anyway. So, getting back to the plot. So she gears up, gets ready to steal, and he kind of goes to her, and they fight over as she's sort of trying to get out of the situation. But they both manage to pull away from a cop that so happens to be sort of looking into the area as they're barely just out of the situation that they were in. And her partner, and I mean partner in the more loving sense, wants to leave the city, but they want her passport so they can actually travel out of the city. So, after that, she sort of checks in with the Batman very briefly. And the Riddler sends his next little code, which is with a caged man and a rat. And Batman suggests that Selina work with him on this particular case. I guess she kind of just cooperates on the basis of... So anyways, Batman and Gordon go over and see this whole rat maze deal, and they find a new note. After that, Selina getting prepped to do her job, she wonders if she's the bait, and Batman doesn't seem too inclined to say no to it, so it seems to stand to reason that that's kind of true-ish. So she walks into Penguin's club, and in this particular time, the cops are in there, these corrupt cops more or so. However, Selina, being more interested in something else, breaks off and talks to this other woman, because this other woman seems to know something or other. So their goals are completely different, and she does eventually break comms, which is, he gave her like this earpiece. So anyways, after that, Riddler has gotten away with another one. So, Batman checks in with Gordon and this whole rat deal that they're going over. And he listens to this tape, and afterwards, he heads out as the first time as Bruce. And he's like talking, and this mayor person who's like running talks to him about how he's again not been spending his money in a cooperative way. So they start to hear some weird noises outside, and it turns out to be a vehicle heading straight towards the funeral that they're having for the person that was killed at the beginning of the movie. The kid's there. Batman saves the kid as the car crashes. In the building is left as they find out that there is a bomb connected to this third victim, with Batman being the one targeted to these particular riddles throughout the movie. So the Riddler makes live contact, feeding the riddles or questions more so to him, as well as this cop that has been placed here in this situation. The first two questions are answered successfully, however, he freaks out. The third question, he does not want to answer it, despite that he says that he's going to die either way, so he does indeed get blown up. Now, this happens a few inches away from Batman, who is blown back by an explosion, and this is like the second time where I've had to explain a bad thing that happens in a movie. And that is when an explosion happens in front of a character's face. This is not the first instance of it, and it's never really good. And I mean, you could have done a lot, or a little bit more, have Batman back up, use his cape to, like, deflect it. A simple solution, but they just have him get knocked back. And it really makes you question just how invulnerable Batman is, despite the fact that he can be blown back. He seems to be fine after the fact, or fine-ish. And more so alive in this scenario, which, even in a Batsuit, an explosion to that degree that happens right in front of you is still, at the very least, gonna hurt a lot. So at the worst, it could probably still even kill you, even in a suit. So, I don't know why people keep doing this in movies. It just never, it breaks suspension of disbelief, every single time, and there's no point to it. There's no reason not to take the few extra steps to just destroy that potential for the disbelief. Just take the time to have Batman notice the noise that, you know, like there's a delay perhaps in the live action, you know, from the Riddler in his live feed to Batman, so that could give Batman enough opportunity to at least back up and again use his cowl or his cape more so to deflect the flames. Again, pretty easy solution, and the movie just doesn't do it. So we're going to go ahead and continue now that that's out of the way. In fact, he is brought into the police station of all areas and unmasked, or I should say, he remains masked, despite all the police officers outside of Gordon being against him, which I find really hard to believe still, so we're still on that train. Gordon separates them into this separate room, as Batman feeds information to Gordon, but they make it seem like an argument where Gordon, or I should say Batman, punches Gordon and leaves after the information is successfully passed from Batman to Gordon. So, he zips up using his device, and as he sort of flies out of the building, he actually fucks up the landing, which is, I found quite surprising. So this is something that he's definitely not used to doing, is gliding out of a building quite yet. I do chalk this particular one up more to him being a 2-year Batman, and him probably not using this particular method of escape that very often. So there's definitely a bit of inference that the audience is allowed to do, and I think that much of suspension of disbelief is fine. So yeah, that is fine. So anyways, after he escapes, he manages to meet up with Gordon again, but separately now. And they learn that Falcone's drug ring is still up and about, and in fact he even has his hands in some of the cops' pockets, so we have a dirty cop system, which is very typical within Gotham, in every iteration of Batman that I'm aware of. But anyways, Catwoman makes her way back into the movie and steals some cash. So she's very desperate to get out of this city, willing to steal from the Penguin, in fact. But Batman moves in, and they find, I forget whose body it is, but they find somebody dead over there. Anyway, a shootout goes down in this sort of slightly open area. Batman moves away and uses his car, a Batmobile, more precisely, as a distraction, at least at the beginning. He then proceeds to chase Penguin in a pretty long chase sequence, to be honest. I think they could have cut down the chase sequence a little bit, and still gotten the same sort of result of Penguin eventually crashing. And the Batman doing the cool shot where his vehicle drives through the flames as Penguin thinks he has finally beaten the Batman, and just to see that imagery behind him of the Batmobile flying through the flames and then catching up to him, making him crash. So he brings him to Gordon, and they pick up a new clue. So it's to the Riddler again, and this particular decoding is in Spanish. So they eventually head over to an orphanage where they're learning a little bit more about his situation, and they learn that his next victim is Bruce Wayne. So Alfred takes a look and sees the new note, and unfortunately he is now injured through checking the note through another near-death experience that without, a bat suit. So there seems to be a common trend, and Alfred is injured in the process, but he is indeed alive. Batman, now alone, puts the clues on the floor and is trying to connect all the pieces. He then makes contact with Selina once more. This time they meet on the rooftops. And she talks more about her past, about how, her situation is pretty bad. And she kind of gets closer to Bruce, or Batman in this scenario, gets a little bit curious, and outright kisses him right then and there, with not a lot of subtlety in her approach to him. But that to me definitely is very Catwoman, though. So that seems to line up from, again, the adaptation, but other parts, the other outside moments, I don't know. Anyway, so this is a moment where he's watching on, seeing his father, Thomas Wayne, make this speech about, how he's gonna help people. Riddler, during his clue, makes a reference to Hush. Now, I found that one kind of interesting. Now, for those of you who don't know who Hush is, there's a movie called Hush. First and foremost, I probably would recommend you watch it. But it is what Riddler becomes. Riddler turns into Hush, at least in that movie. Spoiler alert for that, I guess, but I think the implication in this movie was to make reference to that very fact. So, they kind of make it a little obvious without, but, if you don't know, then you don't know, I suppose. And as it would turn out that, and this is not the first time that this has been the case, but the Waynes have their own dirty secrets. They're not the perfect, family unit, as it was seemed to implied to Bruce as he was growing up. So he heads out as Bruce to meet up with Falcone. Bruce asks the questions about how his father was killed and how this all ended up this way, and he learns the truth again about how it wasn't perfect, the perfect imagery, and he goes to Alfred a little more upset than he has ever been at Alfred throughout this movie, telling him that, this whole thing, and Alfred says that, yes, he did have a moment of weakness, but it was all for his wife and for you. So that's definitely a moment that more so characterizes Thomas Wayne, a man who was not perfect, but he tried to do his best for his family. So that's quite a little bit of information we can gather there. So anyways, Alfred talks about how he cares about Bruce's well-being, and Bruce reciprocates that now at this point, caring about Alfred through the ventures they have been through. Anyway, Catwoman proceeds to attack one of the corrupt cops, and as I mentioned earlier, is willing to kill to get the job done. As I mentioned, Falcone already has his hands in the cups, but Batman moves in to stop her just in time. So she talks about Falcone, and very shortly after, his particular tape, or one of his tapes, are made public, or on the news, I guess. And I guess that was fed through the police, or however that works. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm just insinuating. So she sort of, kind of fights a little bit there. Anyway, Batman walks in with the attack as Falcone proceeds to try to get in on this little whole situation, attacking Selina. However, Falcone is arrested in this scuffle. And after the scuffle, Penguin moves in, and it's almost shot as if Penguin shot Falcone, but the cops point up and say that the light or something like upstairs, the firing came from upstairs. So the Batman moves in, and the cops move in after to this location, finding the person behind the Riddler just sort of sitting there casually. Finds a new Batcage, and Batman now we cut to Batman now meeting Riddler in Arkham, so some amount of time passes, presumably. This dialogue that happens next is a bit puzzling, as the Riddler says at least when he starts, it seems to insinuate that he knew that Bruce Wayne was Batman. However, as he seems to further insinuate, he actually doesn't seem to know that that's the case. But he does bring up that he is a true orphan, and that Bruce, while being an orphan, he had all that money, and again, he had that care because of that money, so he doesn't know, or as Penguin insinuates, the Riddler insinuates that He doesn't know what it's truly to be a true orphan in that regard. Batman tells him that he will be forgotten, and in that moment, he does proceed, the Riddler does, to have what I said earlier, kind of this cringy, yelly moment. So Batman goes back to check one of the rooms, to go to the floor to see a new riddle, and as it would turn out, the Riddler wasn't done, despite him being arrested. He had one more plan up his sleeve. So these bombs go off as soon as he figures out the riddle. Now, what's interesting about how, when I was first watching it, at least initially, because he was sort of dialoguing it through, I thought what was happening, at least initially, is that he was imagining it happening and we were seeing that as the audience, but no, it was actually happening. The bombs are really going off throughout the city. And apparently, the Riddler, with his content creator sort of avenue here in this movie, has had other people sort of show up to this. I guess he's sort of off-screen been, like, kind of guiding them to be like, hey, there's going to be this one last riddle and I want all of you to be a part of it. And they were like, fine. So that's just how that works out, I guess. The Gordon is, like, in the vicinity. The boy that we saw at the beginning of the movie is within the vicinity. The mayor that we saw is shot at. She manages to survive as well. So there's a lot of that going on in this movie now. That's like the third person who's, like, miraculously survived something they probably shouldn't have. As the Batman moves in a crazy entrance, Selina is also in the vicinity and finds or sees an alternative way to get to where Batman is currently. So Batman begins to struggle a little bit here, as there are quite a few people up there. Selina does come in for a successful save, so she does get that opportunity, but she's then promptly attacked as well. During this altercation, he gives himself a drug, a green jug in particular, so there have already been some theories that is like a drug within the universe that they use, venom, I guess that was what they call it, the thing that Bane uses. Batman slashes his... It's a weird moment, but he kind of, like, dashes away towards this, like, rope, and then he, like, slashes himself down towards where the people are, instead of just using his cape to glide down. Like, I don't know why he did that way. That was kind of stupid. Again, maybe he was too afraid that the glide would fuck him up again. Anyway, but he still cut himself down, so either way, it was really stupid. Despite that, he sees that the people are, like, trapped underneath, like, this wreckage that they're in. There's this whole water, because the explosions cause the water to come in, and there are people within the vicinity that have all been trapped in this sort of, like, I guess it's like a concert area, I guess is what I would call it. So they're stuck under the rubble, and Batman uses a light torch to help guide them. They're a little hesitant at first, but they eventually, one by one, pull themselves out, with Batman guiding them as soon as they are out of this particular situation. After he helps save the people, his narration returns about how crime never truly ceases, and that vengeance alone is not enough, or rather, vengeance being the tool, the sole tool to save the city is not enough. That he needs more than just vengeance to sort of, the vengeance of his parents' death being insinuated here is sort of his driving factor for doing this entirely, being the Batman. So he says that vengeance is not enough, because, in particular, I forget when this happens in the movie, but one of the people during the fight says that he is vengeance. And Batman is sort of taken aback by that, and even Riddler alluded to it in their in prison escapades, that he thought that the Batman would be on his side because the Riddler was focusing his little escapades on these broken cops within the system. But I think the whole killing part is probably the main thing that currently separates the Batman and the Riddler. So the Batman took that to say, like, no, I'm not there. So again, a very distinct line has been made in this version of the Batman that says he currently has not killed and does not kill. So I think they're establishing that that is the rule of this Batman, that he does not kill. And again, comparing that to Selina as well. So they make that very distinctive in this movie, that he indeed does not kill currently. So Batman goes to Selina for the last time, and she's like, and he's like, this isn't obviously gonna work out. She wants to leave. I gotta go back to what I'm doing. But they do drive alongside each other on their motorcycles. Catwoman goes one way, and Batman heads right back in. And that is the end of the Batman. And there are a few issues here. Again, survivability probably being pretty up there. I thought... I actually forget where this happens. I think it's when the Riddler is in the prison cell as well, at some point. We also get a brief cameo / sequel bait to the Joker, so they're sequeling the Joker again. I'm not sure who the actor is. Apparently someone from that movie with the I already forget what it's called. Oh my god. That's how bad that movie is. But I won't say, based off of what I heard, I'm not going to say whether or not this is a good Joker or not. There's just not enough material for me to sort of distinguish what kind of Joker they're going to be going for here in the sequel. That there's, based on how successful this movie is, they're definitely going to be doing the sequel to this. So I'm not going to tell you how good this Joker is quite yet, or how bad this Joker is quite yet. I simply don't have enough information to give a definitive answer, and I don't want to be one of those people who just says, oh, it's bad because he was in this previous movie that was bad. Or, I don't want to give him the whole Heath Ledger thing, because that's what happened to Heath Ledger, by the way, before he was in The Dark Knight. So everyone was saying, like, oh, he's going to be a terrible Joker, and then, lo and behold, he became probably the most iconic live-action Joker that we have had. So, that goes to show that you gotta wait until you see more, and for me, I gotta wait to see more, as well as his actual look, because a part of that is going to definitely help build in what kind of Joker he's going to be. So we shall see what type of Joker we're going to get. I don't know. As for this movie, again, I feel like the Riddler, most of his beginning stuff, all of his riddles were fine to good. His ending was a little bit cringe. for me personally, but I think at the end of the day, that's a subjective thing. I think it's actually, objectively, it's fine for what it's trying to do, I think. Again, survivability is still an issue in this movie, and there are definitely some things that they could do to fix that. Again, just small things that they can do. There are definitely a few convenient things that when characters enter and exit a thing, primarily Selena, in her intro and that whole ordeal. So quite a few conveniences that help sort of push this narrative along. So at the end of the day, my score, out of 10, would actually be a 6 out of 10. Now, interestingly, before I just say that's the end, in terms of pure adaptation, if we were to go down that route, this Batman, comparatively to the animated version of the Batman, or just Batman in general, I would definitely still make the same argument that this is probably one of the better adaptations of the Batman that we have currently seen. In terms of, this is the detective, or, sort of sleuthing into the whole detective sort of aspect of the Batman, which is definitely a part of his arsenal in the original animated show. So I do appreciate that the movie definitely focuses in on the whole detective aspect, because even in the Dark Knight trilogy, I felt like there was a significant part of that was missing. And that's not to say that there wasn't any, and that's not to say that I can remember off the top of my head when the detective parts come into play in those movies, but suffice it to say that the whole adaptation of this version of Batman is still greatly appreciated. I think for a lot of people, this is something that they've been sort of waiting for, this sort of more detective-based crime fighter, because that's definitely one of the bigger aspects of this character. And so, with a sequel and perhaps even a third movie coming along the way, depending on how good the sequel does, I suppose the things that we are going to be seeing, potentially, outside of Joker, is perhaps him, maybe more in the second movie, taking on more of the role of the Bruce Wayne aspect. We can see a little bit more of that, how that sort of, provided from this movie, how he sort of takes on that role now that he has sort of realized that, again, just vengeance alone is not enough. So will that sort of seep into his ideals as Bruce Wayne as well? Most likely. I heard some whispers in the wind that talk about Robin potentially. That'd be neat. We haven't had a Robin in quite a long time in a movie, in a live-action movie, so it'd be really interesting to see a Robin. My implication from seeing the first movie was that they were going to use that boy to be a Robin. I don't know if that is the scenario. I don't know. That could very well be the case. He seems to be along that age that Robin typically is, I think. That is to say, one of the things that I think is going to be interesting about that is that, typically speaking, that the last live-action Robin was very much an adult, trying to play a younger character. So it'd be interesting to see DC actually see if they can do a live-action, young, kid-like character. And that is not to say that this would be the first time that that's happened, because that is not true. The first movie that I'm aware of that uses a kid character, or a kid as a superhero, would be Kick-Ass, and the person I'm referring to is Hit Girl. She was young in that movie, so I would probably say that's the youngest I've seen someone play a young superhero in a movie that I'm aware of, in a live action sense anyway. So it'd be interesting to see how they tackle the next, if they're allowed to have Robin have cool action sequences and all that cool stuff, if that's the route that they're going to go down, or if they're going to just throw in some older guy, which is, I think, would be a shame, because they kind of set this kid up to be like, he lost his father, and in Batman, the kid explicitly saw Batman, and he kind of had that look of at the end of the movie. So I don't know, I think that'd be a nice follow-in from this movie, and again, I think that'd be greatly appreciated, to actually see a Robin that's fitting of what I would suspect to see Robin be for once in a live-action movie. Anyway, outside of that, and Joker, I suppose there would be the third movie, and kind of thinking about who else would they use in these movies. They sort of didn't necessarily stop the Penguin, so I suppose he can follow along in the sequel, perhaps to a degree. Selina's gone, so I'm not sure if she'll pop back in. Batman still has plenty of oddity characters in there. And considering that their second one is going to be the Joker, definitely if they're going to do a third one, I'm very much questioning who they're going to pull out, because usually you want to, at least for me, my ideal would be you want to save your top villain for the finale, but I don't know if they're gonna do someone if they're gonna redo Ra's al Ghul for again, but this version of the Batman, or if they're gonna try to do someone new. I would much prefer to see someone who hasn't had a live action counterpart yet in this be the third villain. I'm trying to think of Batman villains that are very big that have not. We've had Scarecrow already. I'm struggling to think of who could be that individual currently off the top of my head. So I don't know who they're gonna try to pull in, but I would personally like to see someone who's not been, who could pull off this big, oh wow, they got, or maybe even someone new. That'd be really interesting if they decided to make a new villain in the Batman movies, even though I know people would probably yell hey, why didn't you get this cool already existing character? I don't know about all that stuff. Anyway, 6 out of 10, as I said, as for the whole movie, but in terms of if you're purely looking at it from an adaptation, this is definitely a step in the right direction, which is still greatly appreciated, and I would still recommend it, if that's any indication. So, if you ended up enjoying this full review, this spoiler review, then please feel free to comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon, third to my PayPal. Any donations are greatly appreciated. Help support my channel, help support me. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.